Support for The Nocturnist comes from the California Medical Association.
At The Nocturnist, we are careful to ensure that all stories comply with healthcare privacy laws. Details may have been changed to ensure patient confidentiality. All views expressed are those of the person speaking and not their employer.
Thanks for listening to The Nocturnist's Shame in Medicine, The Lost Forest. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome, and I actually recommend you rewind and start at episode 1. This is a series that builds on itself over time, so starting at the beginning will definitely lead to the richest listening experience. Enjoy the show.
So my attorney, every day before court, and on the first day especially, I had to meet him at his office. And he's like, I'm going to drive you to the courthouse. And it was interesting because he drove me in a pickup truck. He and the junior attorney sat in the front, and I sat in the back with like all the dog blankets and whatever. And he was like, people are going to watch you get out of the car. So from the minute we get there are optics involved. So you're getting out of the back of this pickup truck. And then we're going to go in. I was okay. And, walking in, it's an imposing building. I'd never really been in a courtroom before. There's the whole going through the metal detector and marble halls, and the sound is echoing everywhere. And there's the clickety clack of people wearing high heels and lots of people in suits and lots of people who aren't and who are there for criminal cases or whatever. But I was very much like a deer in the headlights thinking, what is happening right now? All eyes are on you. Judge starts giving you instructions and giving the jury instructions, and I liken it to being like Alice in Wonderland. You fall into this hole. Nothing makes sense. You don't even know who to trust. You don't know what to believe. You don't know if your skill set's going to help you in any way. You have no idea what the heck is happening.
You're listening to The Nocturnist's Shame in Medicine, The Lost Forest. I'm Emily Silverman. Today we're going to be talking about shame and litigation. A lot of people think that only bad doctors get sued, or at least that only other doctors get sued. But actually, it's a thing that happens to many, many people in the healthcare field and can be a huge source of shame. Mostly we'll be exploring this theme through the story of Dr. Gita Pensa, an emergency medicine doctor in Rhode Island whose voice you just heard. In many ways, Gita's story is incredible, but in other ways, it's actually quite average considering how often doctors deal with litigation stress. I'll let Gita take it away once again.
In 2006, I was a pretty young attending. I was about 5 years out from residency, and I was working in a community hospital. At the time, I was a nocturnist. I was the only doctor in the hospital at night, and I really loved what I did. I would run the emergency department. I'm an emergency physician, and then I would have to go upstairs to run a code or intubate someone, come back down to my department, maybe go up to labor and delivery because we didn't have OB in-house at night, deliver a baby, come back down. It was terrifying at times, but it was absolutely where I felt like I belonged. And then one night, I took care of a young woman. She was around 30 years old, and she came in with a very complex, very confusing presentation. And I spent a lot of time with her and her husband trying to sort out what was going on. And I did a very thorough physical, and I revisited her probably 5 times during her visit. I imaged her. I called a consultant. I woke them up in the middle of the night. I was worried. And in the end, I wound up discharging her with a plan in place to see a specialist at 9 a.m. that morning, 3 hours later. But she never made it there. Instead, she went home and went to bed. And about an hour later, she suffered a massive stroke. And because she was taken to a tertiary care center after that, I had no idea that anything had happened until I was named in a lawsuit a few months later. And I was completely stunned. I was crushed, is probably not too heavy a word to use. I was absolutely, absolutely flattened. I remember getting the notice and feeling like I was going to vomit and having to sit down and breaking into a sweat and just not comprehending in that moment. And I also didn't know the first thing about what to do next because no one in my training had ever talked to me about what to do once you were served. And I think the implication was to me that if you were a good doctor and you followed all the risk management rules and you were nice to your patients and you had the spirit of a good physician, that you would not have to worry about it. Because if you were a good doctor, it wouldn't happen. And that was the beginning of this, the emotional, I can't say roller coaster because roller coasters have highs. What's the word? Oh, I don't know. Chasm. some word like that. But that's where it started. And so in that moment, I recall that I just really unraveled because everything I had felt about myself and being a good doctor to that point was just decimated in one fell swoop. And at the same time, I felt awful about what had happened to my patient. I mean, this is a young woman who was an engineer who put her trust in me and her faith in my abilities. And a terrible thing had happened to her. And I didn't understand it. And I felt like I must have missed something. I didn't understand what went wrong. And for all the faith she had put in me, I had come up short. And now she was permanently disabled. And I had a really hard time living with that. My instinct in that situation is like, I wanted to pick up the phone and call her. I wanted to arrange a meeting. All I wanted to do was just explain to her, like, I tried so hard. I don't understand what happened. I wanted to have that sort of basic human moment with someone that, I didn't know if I'd been the one who hurt her. I knew that it happened like on my watch. And I wanted to talk to her. And that is, of course, absolutely not something that can happen once litigation starts. I had a lawyer, I had the insurance company. They were trying to talk to me about what was happening. But all I really knew was that I was the sole physician defendant. I was the sole face of this case. And the initial demand was $28 million. And I had seen cases like that play out before in our state. It was front page news when there was a verdict like that, and they would name the physician, publicly shame them, and the physician never got to say anything about the case. And I just didn't know what to do with those emotions at all. And now I know that it was textbook litigation stress, but I had never heard that phrase before, and I had certainly never seen it in a textbook. And I didn't want to take care of patients because I was afraid. It's a tremendous responsibility we have, and a lot of times we have to put that in the back of our minds to do what we do every day. If you really thought about the implications of every single action that you went through in a day, like you couldn't do anything. You'd be paralyzed. But that's what started to happen. Should I order this test? Should I not order this test? I probably should order this test because what if I miss this? I didn't want to see patients. I didn't want to miss anything. I didn't want to hurt anyone. And, at home, I really wasn't that much better. I think I couldn't really stop perseverating, ruminating. I certainly was impatient with my children and my spouse, and it had a way of seeping into everything. I knew that other doctors had gotten sued, and I actually knew somebody who had gone to trial and lost of absolutely no fault of his. as much as I understood that it could happen to other physicians and I thought of him as a good physician, I still somehow felt like it was sort of like this scarlet letter. I think shame is probably the chief word at the heart of all of it. And I knew that I was going to, if I settled or if I lost, I'd have to report that for the rest of my career. I know applying for licensure and all of that, like it just doesn't go away for so long. And I just, it's not something you want people to know. And meanwhile, settlement offers were rejected. Every kind of reconciliation attempts, all of them failed. And it became very plain that we were heading towards trial. And so in 2011, I did go on trial. My attorneys had prepared me well enough that I kind of got through it, but I felt very much like a zombie. There's a lot about that I don't even remember. We have a certain skill set in medicine that does not serve you well when you're going through litigation. And that, I liken it to showing up to like a basketball game with your tennis racket and you don't have no idea what are they doing with these balls and why are they throwing them? It's scary. I remember testifying, I think it was like a day and a half that I was on the stand, and it was pretty brutal. And I won in the end, but it did not feel much like winning. I had actually said in the middle of it to my chairman, who was a wonderful man, who would come to the courthouse and try and be supportive. And I had said to him in the middle of the trial, I'm not coming back. Just, I don't know, you have to figure it out. I'm not coming back. And he made me promise to just come back for 2 weeks. And if I felt like after 2 weeks, I didn't want to do it anymore, that he would say, okay. And the funny thing was just getting back into seeing patients, as much as it felt like a drag and there was fear and dread when I would go into work, I realized like, oh, okay, I'm trained to do this. I can keep doing it. I don't like it. But while I figure out what else I'm going to do, I can do this. But it wasn't long after that that I got the notice of the plaintiff's intent to appeal the verdict, which I just had not even actually been on my radar. I had thought that I'd finally just put the whole thing behind me, and then all of a sudden, it started again. Everything felt so ugly and dirty and unfair and foreign. And by that time, I had sort of figured out that there wasn't anything else I could have done in this case, and that I would never have been able to predict without a crystal ball what was going to happen to this woman. And I just could not imagine dealing with that for one more day. And so when it started again, I was really, really, really in a low place. In the meantime, my kids were growing up. I'd seen this patient in 2006. I was pregnant with my third child. By the time I went to trial in 2011, she was in kindergarten. And the years went on and they got older, and still, it just kept coming back. I went through all the layers of the courts. And then in 2015, my verdict was overturned. And they informed me that I was going back to trial. And I just about lost my mind. All of those old feelings, and then overlaid on that was this anger. I was so mad, the stupid system. Year after year after year, like how can they torture you like that for so long? I just felt like this is never, ever, ever going away, and this is just my life now. And I was Sorry, I feel kind of bad when I think about what I felt like. So it actually, yeah, so you can probably hear it in my voice. I'm sorry, but it was so bad. I realized that I was in really big trouble. And I think I knew that for a long time before that. And I do what doctors do. I mean, I think I was pretty good at putting a brave face on things, trying to run my household, going to work, taking care of the patients, but I knew that I was in trouble. And there was this one phone call with my attorney, and he was awesome, but he was a no-nonsense guy. He had actually been a Marine at some point, so he was not having any of my guff. So one day I was on the phone with him, and he was just telling me, like, you gotta put your big girl pants on. Like, it's time. We've got to, like, get our stuff in gear. We're going to get new experts. We're going to do XYZ. They were like, you did everything right. You're going to get back in there and you're going to fight the fight. That's what you're going to do. And so that day I remember hanging up the phone and I just had this moment of just, sobbing, these like great heaving sobs that I had just gotten so used to at that point. And when that was all done, I just sort of put my head up and I thought, you know what? I call this, like, now when I think about it and I speak about it, I call it my Scarlett O'Hara moment, because I just kind of decided that, all right, you know what? I will go back to trial, but with God as my witness, I will never be like this again.
Hi, Gita.
Hi, Emily.
So, Gita, when we were talking earlier, you described that you embarked on this journey to educate yourself about medical litigation.
Yes.
Tell me, what were the first few steps of that process?
One day, a doctor that I was friendly with, one day he said at sign out, I have something for you. And he took this book, the self-help book, out of his bag and he handed it to me and he said, I've been through what you're going through. And I thought this was helpful. And maybe you will too. All at once was this realization that maybe I hadn't been outwardly holding it together as well as I thought I had. And a little bit of shame of like, oh God, everybody must think that I'm, losing it and someone thinks I need a self-help book. But I did not read it. I took it home and I was, thinking like, what do I do with this? I think I hid it, but I hid it in a place that I would see it periodically. So I put it in my bedside drawer table. And when I would open it, I would see the title. And the title was When Good Doctors Get Sued. And just the title that, this happens to good doctors. Like, that was just so reassuring to me that for a while, I just kind of hung on to that. And honestly, I think it was a couple of years, before I took it out. And I think it was really around the time that I realized that I was going to have to go back to trial. I mean, it was sort of after hanging out with my lawyer and realizing like I need to get my stuff together because I can't fall any further into this hole, or I don't want to, because I'm afraid of what will happen if I do. And so that was the start of it. And I think just that, like, cracking the spine and sitting down and reading a few pages and realizing like, oh, people do know what this feels like. Someone out there took the time to write a book about it. Maybe this will help. And that was truly pivotal. And so, taking down this facade of like, no one can help me. Like, I don't understand why I can't cope with this on my own. I should be able to do that. I carry all these other things. Why can't I do that? And allowing myself to just sort of, it almost felt like an indulgence, but to like indulge in this, just spending some time with this book. And it was really eye-opening. This wasn't just about the litigation. There was a lot more behind it in terms of how I thought of myself as a doctor, what I thought about the litigation process and what it meant about me, and realizing that I deserved to feel better. I didn't have to let this consume me. I had suffered enough, and that there was, actually a limit on the amount that I needed to let this derail my entire life. And finally got to this realization that, like maybe the way doctors think about litigation in general can be changed. Maybe there is cultural changes that we can make. Maybe we are just inculcating shame and distress that doesn't necessarily need to be there into a process that, yes, it's a process that's fraught already, but so much is laid on top of it from what we're taught and the way that we behave in medicine around litigation. We basically, the isolation and the stigmatization when it happens to virtually every doctor who practices until they're 60. If you're in any kind of a, middle to high risk specialty, most people will be named at least once. Like, why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't we addressing it? And so coming to a place where I had started cultivating different habits of thought about it, but the books only went so far. They really just kind of let me understand that this is a really common shared distress that physicians have about litigation, but it didn't really give me a lot about how to dig out of it. But the first step I knew was eroding the shame that medicine as a culture has built into the system. And the way that I thought it would be best to address that was having people talk about it. Welcome to the second episode of Doctors and Litigation. Hi, Pensa, and this is an L-Word mini.
So tell me about the decision to start the L-Word.
My trial was set to start in 2018. So in 2017, I went on social media and I started asking physicians if there were people out there who would be willing to share their story for a project I had in mind about litigation stress. It was like no one had ever asked them before because I'm pretty sure no one had. But I got so many names, so many emails, and then I just started doing interviews one after another. I think I've done, let me think about this for a second, probably 60 formal recorded interviews. And eventually the idea came to me that this should be sort of a curriculum. I wanted something where you could just press play and be alone in your car and listen to people talk to you about how what you're feeling is natural, that it's going to be okay, and also imparting the information that I feel like you need to know.
It sounds like in your story, there wasn't really a mistake. You did the best that you could with the information that you had at the time, and then the patient unfortunately had a terrible outcome. And it's unfortunate that physicians in that situation get sued when there isn't really a mistake involved. Mm-hmm. But I was going to ask, in cases when there is a mistake involved, and of course the word mistake is really mysterious, and how do you even define what that is?
Yeah.
But let's say there is a terrible mistake. Something was missed or misdiagnosed. How does all of this shift in those situations, or does it not?
One thing I do want to make the point is that when I talk about the suffering of the physician who has cared for a patient, it in no way negates the suffering of a plaintiff or a patient who has been harmed in some way. And it's rare for that patient to be able to understand a cascade of events that led to something that has caused them pain or suffering or even the death of a loved one. Part of why these conversations are difficult to have openly in an open forum is exactly that. Most of us are greatly skilled and practiced at what we do, and we operate every single day in areas of gray. We operate in a gray area every day, but we demand perfection. So when you are expected to always be right in an area where we are operating in the gray with imperfect resources and, who knows, unreliable historians and things that lead us down the primrose path a certain way, when we are overtasked and under-resourced, when we are just trying every single day to keep it together and something bad happens, I don't think any of us make excuses for ourselves. And my intention is not to suggest that we should give ourselves a pass. That's not possible for most of us, just as like thinking, feeling, sentient human beings. But I do think there's a place where we can allow ourselves some grace of understanding that we were doing the best we could in what is a very difficult arena. There are too many variations in human beings when you open them up and go to do a surgery. There is no way to be right all the time, and all of us will have made mistakes by the time we're done with this, but some of us will have to suffer more for them because it was just our turn to have something bad happen that happened to have more serious consequences than another time that someone else made a mistake. I'm not suggesting that we sweep those things under the rug, but I am suggesting that we all deserve to process those events, to grieve, and to have some compassion for ourselves, because that is greatly left out of it, I think, when there is the suffering of the plaintiff or a family member to be reckoned with. It seems like there is no room for the physician to feel that way. But I dispute that.
So my name's Tom Germano. I'm an emergency physician in Providence, Rhode Island. The patient, he had come in one night complaining of a low to moderate grade fever and a cough and some mild shortness of breath. There was no radiologist on duty. It was a small community hospital outside of Boston. So I read the x-ray as no acute pathology, and my discharge diagnosis for the patient was, quote, viral syndrome, end quote. I did not opt to put the patient on antibiotics, and I told him to follow up with his doctor in 3 to 4 days if he was feeling no better, and to return to the ED if he was doing worse. That's all I really know about him. Until, of course, 2 years later, when the subpoena showed up, and I was named as a defendant in a wrongful death lawsuit. The patient's widow brought a complaint against me in the hospital, and ultimately the case was settled out of court, and I think they settled for $250,000 against me, and the case went away. Maybe 5 years later, I was working at another hospital in the vicinity nearby, and a woman signed in, and I remembered that her name was a bit unusual. I had the widow of my original patient who was bringing or had brought a lawsuit against me, and now she was signing into my department as a patient. And so I had some soul searching to do. Was I going to go into the room and identify myself and wonder if she would recognize my name, and then what would that lead to, you know, with me potentially being her doctor? Or should I approach one of my partners to just take the case? And I sat out in the hall for, 5-6 minutes thinking about this, and I so badly wanted to know what happened to her husband. You know, what did he think of the care that he got that night in the emergency department? Did he think I blew him off? Did he think I was reasonable? And then what was the backstory? You know, what happened to him after he had gotten home, but before he got so sick? And were there any other things that led up to his visit that I had not known about, or what medical history had I missed on this guy? Anyway, I sat out in the hall thinking about whether or not I was going to go into this room and introduce myself. I mean, what would you do in that situation? And after thinking about it, I thought, I would so love to talk to this woman. I mean, I wasn't angry at her. I mean, she'd lost her husband, she had children to raise on her own, and I couldn't give her back any of that. And I think that every physician wants a good outcome for their patient. So I wanted to let her know that I was sorry. But I also wanted to let her know that I thought I had done a reasonable job. But I wanted to hear her side of it so badly. After spending some time in the hall and thinking about it, I decided that it could go really badly. And I asked one of my partners to see her. And so I'll never really know.
Not long after I started practicing as an attending, I had a surgical complication. It's not an uncommon complication, poses no long-term health risks, but it can affect the quality of life of the patient. I know, it's vague, but I'm trying to keep this anonymous. I was helping the patient work through it, but then they were lost to a follow-up, and I assumed it was because their symptoms had resolved. That was until I received a summons and complaint from an attorney. Shame. Shame for the complication, and shame for being a jerk. Why? Because we're taught in our training that the best defense against litigation is a good bedside manner. Nobody sues a doctor they like. So, not only am I an incompetent surgeon, but I'm also an unlikable piece of garbage. I wanted to quit medicine. Sometimes I still want to quit. Now, per the Nocturnists, yes, I read the assignment, Brene Brown said, "Shame cannot survive being spoken." Could I speak to anyone about this? No. Why not? We're not allowed. Whoever we tell may need to be deposed. So, the shame survived.
Somewhere around then, a colleague emailed me about a charity ballroom dance competition.
Once again, here is Gita.
That exists in our state, and they call it Dancing with the Doctors. And basically, it's like Dancing with the Stars. They match you up with a professional dancer, and you train for 3 or 4 months, and then there's this big gala, and you fundraise. But this colleague of mine had won the year before, and she was very like, "I think you'll like this. I think this would be great for you. I think that, I think you should check it out." And I was going to delete it again. And then right before I did, I noticed the date of the gala was right before my trial. And I thought at the time, like, man, maybe this would be good for me. As terrifying as it actually is, like, maybe this would be good for me. Maybe this is the thing that would actually kind of keep my mind off of the litigation and give me something else to focus on that isn't actually work. And all right, so I filled the thing out and I sent it in, and I was, I had this moment afterwards, like, oh my God, what did I just do? But then I was in it to win it. On the day of the gala, so many of the nurses that I work with came. A third of that community hospital staff came. They rented a party bus basically, and all these nurses came, so they were completely lit by the time they came. It was so great. My family came, my friends came, so many people came to support me, and all of them knew why I was doing it. I had been very, very open and honest about what was going on, and that made it, I think, all the sweeter. And I danced well. And I won really the fundraising award. I raised $25,000 for the free clinic, and overall that night they made over $130,000. And it was the experience of a lifetime, and it was just the thing. It was absolutely just the thing I needed. I just rode that wave into court. I was nervous, of course. You can't get rid of all of the nerves, but I was very well prepared. I had practiced for that. I had rehearsed for that role. It is a role. And I knew how to play my part. I actually invited my residents to come and to watch me testify. I'm going to tell you the day that it's going to be. I don't know when you're going to get another experience like this. Come and watch. And as much as, I tried my residents because they didn't want to come, they couldn't watch me do it. I'm like, you need to learn about this. But in the end, I wanted to do it better, and I knew I could. This is a 12-year odyssey, and my kids now are teenagers. They'd grown up with this, and they knew what it meant to me. And I think my older girls who were teenagers were watching to see, and I wanted to be this role model of, grace under pressure, but I wanted to be that for them. I wanted to do better this time. And I did. I have to say, I am very proud of the way I testified. I think that I handled myself well in court. It was a completely different experience the second time around. I knew what I was doing. All of the nurses who would come to that ballroom dance thing, they would come to court, which is interesting because they polled the jury afterwards, and they thought that was, they didn't understand the medicine involved because it was complex and they don't know medicine. But what they knew was that I had people coming in every day and sitting in the back who, maybe they were coming in their scrubs, or it was, clear that they were there for me in some way or other. But they looked at that and they thought, well, this is a doctor that people seem to love. Maybe we'll side with her. Still, even if I was prepared, it was still so hard to listen to, these, opening statements or expert witness testimony, just hours and hours and hours and hours of how bad a doctor you are, how bad a person you are. It's really hard, even when you're prepared for it, to keep that armor on. And it was so nice to have people who heard those things come back to me and say, that's not the truth. That's not who you are. That's not who we see when we work with you. You just need to get this stuff behind you and come back to work where you belong with us. And just, don't listen to that stuff. And I did win a second time, and they did not pursue an appeal. So now, I've released most of the podcast. It's sort of meant to be this independent curriculum, the psychological and practical preparation required, I think. It's really kind of just the basics, but part of recovering from all of this is finding some little nugget of good so that I don't feel like 12 years of this were just a complete waste of my life. Talking about what happened, sharing my experience, but also trying to be someone who can educate people. I am grateful that things unfolded the way they did. I would never say I'm happy that this happened, but I do think in some ways that on the other side, I've come out a much more, what's the word? That you can change and you can learn to be happy again.
Thanks for listening to the Nocturnist Shame in Medicine, The Lost Forest. If you want to hear Geeta's amazing podcast, which features interviews with physicians and tips from experts about how to deal with litigation, practically and emotionally, search for Doctors and Litigation, the L Word, wherever you get your podcasts. Next week's episode of our Shame series is called In Hiding and includes stories from clinicians who feel that they have to hide parts of themselves at work. If you're struggling or in crisis, call or text 988. If you're a physician, you can call the Physician Support Line, a national, free, and confidential resources that's specifically designed for physicians and medical students. There's no appointment necessary. You can just call 1-888-409-0141. And as always, take good care of yourselves and each other, whatever that means for you. Shame in Medicine, The Lost Forest was co-created by me, Emily Silverman, as well as Will Bynum and Luna Dolezal. It was produced, edited, and mixed by Sam Osborne and produced and assistant edited by Molly Rose Williams, with additional producing by Adelaide Papazolo. Thanks to medical student producers Corrine April Yolanda Khan and Nikhil Rajapuram, production coordinator Penelope Lusk, impact campaign manager and assistant producer Carly Besser, and Exeter team coordinator Alice Watterson. The Nocturnist executive producer is Ali Block, and our chief operating officer is Rebecca Groves. The series illustrations are by Beppe Conti, and the music comes from Blue Dot Sessions. Shame in Medicine, The Lost Forest was made possible in part by the Shame in Medicine Project at the University of Exeter, funded by the Wellcome Trust. The Nocturnist is supported by the California Medical Association, a physician-led organization that works tirelessly to make sure that the doctor-patient relationship remains at the center of medicine. To learn more about the CMA, visit cmadocs.org. Our show is also made possible with donations from listeners like you. Thank you so much for supporting our work in storytelling. If you enjoy the show, please follow us on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And while you're in there, you can help others find us by leaving us a rating and review. To contribute your voice to an upcoming project or to support our work with a donation, visit our website at thenocturnist.com. I'm your host, Emily Silverman. See you next week.